Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Love Well podcast. My name is Anna,
My name is Marlene.
and we are so excited you guys are joining with us today. We actually have a special guest that we'll be able to get into in a little bit, but we just wanted to kind of give you guys a recap. If you guys have been following along with us, we've been talking a lot about immigration and just kind of the misconceptions around immigration, some of the misunderstandings that
Mm-hmm.
um, can kind of happen just around the idea of immigration. And so, if you missed the last episode, we talked briefly about what it looks like to go through the immigration process. And one of the misconceptions we had talked about was the idea of getting in line and what that looks like. So, if you missed that, please go back and listen to that because that has some really, really good nuggets for you guys to listen to and to learn from as well. But today, I'm excited because we're going to kind of dive into the misconception and common view of that immigration looks the same for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get to talk to some people today about that and their own story as well with the immigration process. So, Marlon?
Anna, I am so excited for our special guest today because this happens to be a dear, dear friend of mine. We actually grew up together in the same country, which is the country of Honduras, as I shared in previous episodes, a little bit of my background. And as Anna said, even though we grew up in the same country, we actually went to the same church and same school, so we share a lot of things, a lot of life there. But we have very different immigration stories. Her immigration process looked very different than mine, and today we're going to get to hear that. And as we dive into stories, I just want to remind us of, I think we mentioned this in a couple episodes before, just the dignifying aspect of stories, and bringing to a side anything that we have heard of before, but we want to bring it back to people and to the heart of it. People,
Yeah.
it's people. And that's our hope and our heart with these episodes, for you to get to hear from firsthand experiences what immigration has looked like for us. So my dear friend Emelissa, I want to brag about her. It would take me the whole episode. She's an incredible human being, period. Someone that loves the Lord deeply. When I tell you guys, like, God in her is incredible, and I know she won't be able to get into the whole story, but she is someone that I just truly admire. Jesus in her is mighty. But anyway, so Emelissa, can you tell us a little bit more about your background, what you're doing now? Tell us so we can get to know you better.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I'll take all the halagos, all the praises, but
Yes. Always,
anyways,
always.
you're so sweet. Yeah, it's an honor to be here. And when Madeline asked me to do this, I was rejoiced because I know this has been on your heart, Madeline, for a long time. And Anna, it's
Mm-hmm.
nice to finally meet you
Yes, you
through all
too.
this. So yeah, I guess a little bit about me. I mean, Madeline kind of gave a little bit of that. Like, I grew up in Honduras. I grew up in a coastal city, same as Madeline, in La Ceiba, and yeah, I went to bilingual school, and so I definitely had some sort of. I think I recognized that I grew up in a middle class
Mm-hmm.
society at home,
Yep.
from a Christian family. My parents were very much involved in my development in general. So I owe a lot of who I am to them, and a very close relationship, I would say, with my dad, my mom, and my siblings. Um, Let me see a little bit about me. Grew up there. Came to the States when I was 15 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So I came right at the spring semester, I would say, to the
Mm-hmm.
States, and so that was a big transition for us. Um, yeah, so we actually became missionaries in Texas. So we planted churches for Latino communities. It was mainly ended up being mainly undocumented Latino
Mm-hmm.
population because we were in the rural areas of Texas. So we did that up until my dad passed away in 2017. So I've definitely had that as part of my story,
Yeah.
that sense of loss from my dad.
Mm-hmm.
And then happily married for more than 4 years, close to 5. A wonderful
Woo!
man. Yeah.
He's great,
Uh,
guys. He's great. He's great. He's great.
Yeah, fun facts. I was a paramedic for a bit. I studied that, and then ended up going to Moody Bible Institute to get my undergrad degree in evangelism and discipleship. And then I just recently finished, praise God, finished in May, my
Woo!
counseling degree. Yes. So I'm
Yes.
currently a mental health therapist at a wonderful private practice who we also get to do some of community work and here in Chicago. So I've been in Chicago for the last 10 years. So I know I probably jumped all over the place, but
No,
I've been
that's
in Chicago
great.
for the last 10 years, which I think it's the closest that's felt to home.
Hmm.
Um, I really do love Chicago. And I mean, I know we're talking about immigration, but I could break a ton of myths about Chicago.
Yeah.
I freaking love
Yeah.
Chicago. It's a wonderful
Yeah.
and one of the most underrated cities, I would
Hmm.
say, in the
Hmm.
If only
US.
you didn't have such cold weather, I would totally move there.
But we're committed at this point.
I was gonna say you have some thick skin. I can't do it. I just can't.
I still hate the snow. Absolutely hate the snow, but the summers here are just magical.
Mm.
So yeah, we're currently saying goodbye to the summer right now, but my heart's a
Oh.
little sad. But it's
Yeah,
okay.
no, for sure, for sure. No, that's
Um,
great. That's great.
yeah, but that's a little bit about me. I guess that's
Yeah.
what I'm doing right now. Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. Anna, I don't know if you want to go into our next.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, also great to meet you because this is our first time meeting, but I love it already. It sounds like we have a lot of similarities for sure. But okay, so what is you already kind of talked about it, but you were born and raised in Honduras. Your ethnic background, and can you tell us a little bit about what it was like there growing up?
Yeah. I grew up with, I mean, I loved it. I would say for the most part, I think there's a lot of, and then I think even in that, I would say as an immigrant now, I'm 30 years old, and I think I may look at the past a little bit with color glasses. So I
Mhm.
recognize my own
Mhm.
remembrance of it, might just lean towards the good times.
Right.
But
I
yeah,
feel that.
yeah, I grew up with my grandparents actually in living in our home. And so it was a very much like I said, it was a close knit family.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would say it was beautiful in the sense of we had a great community. Our church community was a big part of our community. I really had great friends in my school. I think I grew up in a home where we valued a lot of different cultures. So I
Mhm.
always grew up with curiosity.
Mhm.
My
That's good.
mom, like Mara knows, my mom loves to cook, and she loves to
Yeah.
cook and learn how to make like Italian, French, like American, um, Arab, like all kinds of different foods. So I
Mhm.
think a lot of it, and she was a baker, and they had a restaurant, and so it was
Mhm.
like
Mm.
I feel like I grew up with a love and joy for cultures that was came from my parents. And my mom was a missionary in her youth,
Mhm.
in her single years. She came to the Lord a little later, and then my dad um, all studied in Guatemala. So I think having both parents who were exposed to different
Right.
cultures and actually lived in different spaces really produced in me, like they really nurtured that part of us that was curious about different cultures and different worlds. So it was very accepting. So we
Yeah.
had people,
Yeah.
we had foreign exchange students that would come learn Spanish, stay with us, and so I grew up like I'm exposed to Swedish people and
Mm.
Canadians and all different kinds of Europeans and so yeah, I think yeah, so that's kind of a little bit how I grew up. And I think I think also like growing up in our church there was a lot of community work, and so I grew
Mhm.
up with
Yeah.
very a dear heart for I think the poor,
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
and just like how language can be a bridge. And
Mm.
so translating reminded me like, oh wow, I can't really fix their situation, but I can, especially Americans would come and provide the services that I can definitely couldn't provide as a young kid, but I could provide
Yeah.
the service,
Mm.
the bridge for the people to get what they needed so they could be
Yeah.
clear communication. And so I thought that was like a beautiful way that I always thought that I wasn't all the way helpless as a person, that there was
Mm.
something that we could give to each other.
Yeah.
I think there was a almost equality in that aspect. Um, the other part of it, I think I grew up in that time where a lot of the violence and corruption starting to, I mean, there's always been corrupt, really, but
Yeah.
I think the violence kind of took
Yeah.
a peak. And
Yeah.
I think my parents own a business, so we definitely saw it from the business side,
Mm.
how that was impacting our fear, our sense of safety kind of started getting compromised. And yeah, that led to basically at the end of the day moving to the US. I think it's a combination of all things, but in God's guidance, we ended up here. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's where it was hard for me to hear. So how even friends of mine who were rich will be targeted in some way or another, and how their
Yeah.
families were fearful of what was happening with cartels. Owning a business could mean that you and your family might be targeted. And so, and I have recognized that this was primarily living in a port city. You are more exposed to those type of things.
Yep.
I've talked to other people who grew up in more like central Honduras, and that's not their experience. So I'm speaking directly from the coastal port area,
Yeah. Yeah.
where you'll see more, ships come in and what do you call it, airplanes and stuff like. So there's just a lot
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
tourism happening. So we definitely, I think maybe Marlene, you can agree, like we just kind
Yeah.
of sense the shift from
Oh,
even
yeah.
how my mom grew up in that city, and she was like, I lived with my grandma. She's like, I don't remember it being like this. And so,
Mm.
I
Yeah.
mean, to the
If I,
extent that, yeah.
yeah, if I can add to the context, because I think that's, well, two things came to mind as you were talking. One is that even as Hondurans, depending on where you live, our
Hmm.
experiences also
Yeah.
vary. One,
Yeah.
okay, so we're not a monolith, even within our own context. Of because when people think about Honduras, it's like, oh, it's a third world country. Yes, it is, but there's so many nuances and layers that go into what it means to being Honduran and living there. And then the other part is just seeing the shift from we experience it from being able to play outside. Like I remember that probably before, under when I was 10 and under,
Hmm.
playing outside with neighbors was normal. But then the shift of, oh yeah, we can't, it's not safe anymore for us
Mm.
to go
Hmm.
to the street
Yeah.
in our
Yeah.
neighborhoods. It's not safe anymore. So life changed in that, reality of like, oh yeah, it's not safe anymore. We have to make sure that someone is with us, like at all times. Like we can't be on our own. Like we could get robbed, just things that
Yeah.
go into that. So anyway, just wanted to say
Right.
that
Yeah.
because yeah.
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 Absolutely. And I think I think our country went through a lot of shift after the Hurricane Mitch in
Yeah.
1988.
Yeah.
There's a lot of poverty, a lot of desperation, and so
Yeah.
there's a lot of reasons to why where Honduras is at.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think another big part was, I think what affected me was also like some of my early exposures to like funerals and stuff were pretty much like
Mm.
severe situations of
Mm-hmm.
violence.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's an element where we feel it as like
Mm-hmm.
there's almost a removal of innocence of what,
Mm.
an end of innocence towards uh, pain and suffering. I remember being at church and just praying for people who were kidnapped,
Mm.
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 and like, yeah. So I grew up also with wonderful parents who were very supportive, and uh, I don't know. I think they helped shelter me. Like in counseling terms, we call it protective factors. So I think they were a
Mm.
huge point of protectiveness.
Mm.
But I definitely saw the impact personally when my mom decided to kind of close the business because
Mm.
the drug cartels were getting, like the narcos were getting a little
Yep.
bit more, I don't know, they were getting too close to home. And
Yeah.
I think my mom decided to just close it. We still did things here and there, but so that was, I think, also an end to a really sweet era in our family
Mm.
where
Mm.
it was financially more stable, but also like, I mean, their business could have grown so big, but we never got
Mm.
to see it because
Yeah.
the corruption and the violence was getting to a point where my family felt uncomfortable.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, it brings back memories because I remember y'all's bakery and
Hmm.
eating there. And then I remember my mom when she told me, I think she had talked to your mom and she was like, oh, yeah, they're closing their business because, all the many reasons, right? And I was like, What? Like, that,
Mhm.
yeah, just thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that.
Yeah.
It's really gives us insight for those who, have, whether they have not traveled to another country, or, just to get a peek into, hey, this is what life kind of looks like in a different country, in a different context.
Yeah.
Um, so now shifting into your story of immigration.
Mhm.
You mentioned that you immigrated when you were 15 years old. Could you
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about what that looked like? What that process looked like coming here?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, well, first of all, my sister was the first one that came to the States.
Hmm.
She moved here to study here. She had an opportunity, so she finished high school here. So we were apart for about, let's say, a year or two.
Hmm.
And then eventually my dad got an opportunity to come. He was a rancher in agriculture, and so he came in as an opportunity to come and just
Hmm.
kind of learn more of that. But during that time that we were apart from my dad, things got worse for us.
Hmm.
To my brother, my mom, and I. Um, I think there was to a point where the safety got compromised, and
Hmm.
so I think that kind of was the tipping point for my parents to be like, well, home isn't safe,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
we don't want to be in. More than that, the value of being together
Hmm.
was deeper than being apart, right?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so I would say yes, violence, but also the part of being apart was not good for us. And my
Yeah.
parents felt a strong guidance to kind of make a shift and have all of us move and be together no matter what we have to go through. And I'm glad they did. But that also meant that we had about, I think my mom told me right about close to New Year's of 2008 um, that we were making the official shift and just joining my dad. And we thankfully all had visas. We were just going to go there and see where the Lord guide us from there. So there wasn't a specific thing that we were moving for, but
Hmm.
they felt a strong calling to be together, and in that asked God's for guidance.
Yeah.
And so I remember um, late 2008, my mom tells me we're moving. A month from then, we had sold everything. I mean, our
Wow.
home was generational home, so we had to say goodbye to our home, our
Hmm.
stuff. We packed one suitcase each. Um, Said goodbye to friends. I had to tell them I don't know when I'm coming back.
Right.
We're
Yeah.
just
Hmm.
leaving.
I
And
sobbed
yeah,
hard.
I know. I'm like trying not to get emotional.
Yeah. No, I
Uh,
know.
Oh.
Me too.
uh, yeah. And so we just kind of, it all happened pretty fast, to be honest. And I think I'm now at a stage where I can process a little more of
Yeah.
that gigantic shift because though I consented
Hmm.
to move, I don't think I understood as a kid
Hmm.
what it all entailed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I got
Oof.
emotional.
It's okay. Thank you. I mean, I'm already crying here too,
It's
so
real. It's
it's
real.
real. And I think it's so important. Thank you for being so vulnerable and being willing to go there, because
Yeah.
it's a cost.
Yeah,
It's a sacrifice, you know?
yeah,
You are saying goodbye to everything you know,
yeah,
everything that was once familiar. Like imagine the impact there is when we move within the US, and move
Yeah.
from city to city. It's a big thing. But now add on the layers of, like, I don't know when I'm gonna come back. I
yeah,
don't
In a
even
totally different culture
In
that
a
you're
totally different
not used
culture.
to.
Yeah, even though you were fully bilingual, like, it's an adjustment. I mean,
oh yeah,
it's a
there's
huge
a lot to it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We haven't even gotten there, but yeah.
Yeah,
So thank you for bringing us into that moment of what it meant, you
The
know?
yeah.
reality. Yeah.
And I think in hindsight, right, I think I'm grateful we did that. But like I said, I think you're treading water for a long
Mm,
time. And
mm,
so you're just trying to reach to whatever shore. But I think even in that, I'm learning that in my personal value of faith, like for me, shore will be until I'm forever in heaven because the
mm,
sense of home, I think the feeling of home left. Actually, I
mm.
would say as soon as my sister moved to the US, and I'm learning
Oh,
more that the sense of home really is more tight knit to the people rather than a space or a place.
Yeah.
And
oof.
so, and there's different levels of home, right? So that I think is the aspect of that I'm kind of processing. But all that to say that that journey ended up being, we came to the States, we really didn't. It was very much like 2 days ago, I just had come through the airport from Honduras, and now I am entering the American school system, which is very different. And I think I didn't understand. Yeah, there's a lot of hardships there, so I don't want to like go too deep into it. But
Yeah.
I think my parents didn't understood English, but they couldn't speak it, and so there was a
Mhm.
lot of shift even in my relationship with my parents, and where I was more pairing and having to interpret, and
Yeah.
then also trying to figure out the system so I can teach the system as I'm a kid myself. So I think there's an element of I had to grow up a little bit faster to try to survive it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then I came to the States and I quickly realized it's nothing like Honduras. So I
Mhm.
already, though I knew English, I had an accent, and so people really took that as I didn't know English.
Mhm.
And so
Hmm.
I praise God for my parents. I get protective factors, right? My parents
Mhm.
always told me you're smart, and I knew I was smart because
Mhm.
I was a good student in Honduras. Um, but from the external version in the U.S., I was told I was dumb or stupid, or I didn't know English well enough
Hmm.
to be at equal pace as everybody else. And so
Mhm.
they wanted to put me under a different ESL classes. And I'm like,
Mhm.
well, no, I do know English. I just need time to get used to talking it all the time. And again, I also understand I moved to a rural Texas. And so that is very different than
Yeah.
city and the
Yeah.
resources available. So like I was the only Honduran walking around. It it was they didn't really knew. I think it was they didn't really know what to do with me too much.
Mhm.
Um, so I give a lot of grace to them, but there was also just an element of the messages that were being thrown at me.
Mhm.
I had to dig very deep into. No, I'm not stupid. I
Mhm.
know what I'm capable of. So there's that. I think that was the transition in 2009, and it took a while for us to understand God's purpose in us moving. Eventually, my dad was a big man of prayer, and the Lord just kind of told him like, you got to talk to the local pastor. It's all English speaking, by the way, and we talked with him, and then it turns out that they had been praying for a Hispanic family to
Wow.
move into the community who want to plant churches, which I mean is amazing because my dad had a degree in theology, which is also very rare in Honduras. His degree
Very
was in
rare.
theology,
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
Super
and
rare. Yeah.
I remember us sitting in that table and we're like having goosebumps because like how is it that all the ducks are like aligning in a row?
Hmm.
I would say so. We finally find that purpose of what we were there for, but there was a lot more struggles that came from that, which was what came with the legal paperwork and what we can do, couldn't do, and all of
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know if I'm answering all the questions correctly, but I
You
think that's
are. Oh my gosh.
okay.
This is incredible. I'm like, can we
Honestly.
just I'm like, you guys are
I
this
feel like you're
is
opening
Yeah.
up so
honoring,
many like
yes.
points that you just don't
So
think
many.
about until someone
Yes.
actually shares their story, which is why we wanted to have, people on here to share their story because it's just so much more informational coming from heart to heart than like
Mm,
reading something or hearing about it,
yeah.
like on the news or something. I do have a question though for both of
Yeah.
you guys because I feel
Mhm.
like Emelissa, you kind of touched on this when you said like, the fact that um you kind of recognized like your parents were very much so accepting of like other cultures and that kind of grew you in a certain way of being open to other cultures in that sense.
Hmm.
And obviously like I was born and raised in the South, like pretty much where Marlon and I are now.
Mhm.
So obviously culture is a very different even in the
Mhm.
States. Like I feel like if you go to Chicago or if you're in the South, like
Mhm.
you
Oh
still
yeah.
get different types of culture or different
1000%.
types of people or whatever.
Mhm.
But do you guys feel like I was having a conversation with someone that's actually from London and she moved here, and she nailed it on the head. And I had never really, because I've traveled a good bit, so
Hmm.
I feel like I've been fortunate enough to see a lot of different cultures and immerse myself in different cultures, which is rare for people in the South. Um, But she kind of nailed it on the head in my mind, because she was like, it's an awareness that a lot of other cultures have that I don't feel like Americans do the best at. You know what I mean? Like, would you guys agree with that statement? Because when she said awareness, and then you, Emelissa, said acceptance, and when you were talking, do you feel like that's something that you noticed right off the bat when you moved here?
Yes. I think it's very complicated because how do I explain it? There's a lot of complexities. Because I do say in
Right.
Honduras we're very accepting of other cultures, but I would say even almost in that almost selective,
Yep.
which is
Okay.
where our selective in the sense of European and American is being
Yeah.
highlighted above other cultures.
Right. Right.
So I don't want to say that we outside of the US are perfect in that. We got work to do on that end.
Oh, a lot.
Yeah.
Everyone
But
Yes.
does. Everyone
But
does.
we all do. Yeah, we all
Yeah.
do. Yeah, go ahead.
but I did think it was interesting for what was really shocking, I would say, culturally shocking for me was I grew up hosting a lot of Americans and to be more specific, like white Americans, and
Yep.
I grew up translating for them and stuff. So I got used to seeing the short-term missionary like
Yep.
Americans.
Yep.
Mhm.
What was
Mhm.
hard for me to see once I started church planting with undocumented immigrants um, in this country was seeing similar people that had gone done short-term missions in my country not be actually accepting or
Mm.
compassionate
Mm.
towards the people that I was actually, me and my family were missionaries too. And so that was really,
Hmm.
um, that was really hard because I felt like this is where I think the political scene has really
Absolutely.
tainted our
Mm-hmm.
imago Dei of people.
Yeah.
Is the image of God in others is the I think that was hard for me because I'm like I had this high view of Americans, and it was really hard to see how once you're in their space,
Yeah.
how we're seen more as a threat rather
Yep.
than someone equal to learn from.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think that's where I
Wow.
grew up with the sense of curiosity about other cultures because I
Mm-hmm.
want to. And I think my dad modeled that a lot, where
Mm.
he wanted to learn about people and other
Yeah.
cultures. He was like a walking encyclopedia. And so for me, I remember when I came to Moody and there was all these international students, and I was one of them. But I met my first Israeli, and I was, oh my gosh, I can't wait to hear about you. I can't wait to hear about what is life is for you. Like, what is this like? And she's like,
Yeah.
what is this? I'm like, I've never had anybody react like that. I'm like, why? But that's because of my dad was like that. So I
Okay.
think
Yeah.
I would say like that initial reaction came from the curiosity of my dad of
Hmm. That's what I
wanting to
mean by the
learn.
lack of just like awareness, the
Yep.
lack of just like wanting to hear people's stories. I feel, wanting to see
Oh,
perspectives. Like,
Yeah.
yes.
it's just, it's
Yeah.
mind boggling. But you're right. I mean, I think a lot of it is,
No,
tying
and I
into.
like Emelissa took the words out of my mouth.
Mm,
One of the and we I immigrated as a 22-year-old. I went to college in my home country. Like it was at that point. We've been hosting Americans since I was probably 4 or 5 years old. Like I have photos from like in our photo albums with missionaries that came and
Mm.
loved on us. So that was the idea I had when I came here and I started introducing myself and the typical like, oh, where are you from? And I was like, Honduras. Shift. One, some people didn't know where Honduras was. A lot of people assumed that. I even got asked like what part of Mexico, but I mean that's a
yeah.
whole other thing. But and the lack of awareness when you talk about awareness, Anna.
Yeah.
But the biggest part was I will go as far as to say people that we actually hosted in our homes who, when we were in their space, said things that I had never would have expected to come out of their mouths about people like ourselves and immigrants. And it was shocking
Mm.
and confusing. I think
Hmm.
confusing. And
Yeah.
then, as you said, it's very complex, Emelissa. Like, there's a lot of layers and a lot of reasons to that. But I think definitely media and forgetting who we're dealing, like who people are, like the imago Dei of people, the yeah, many things into that. But yes, I agree
I
with
think
that.
there's also something to say about, and we'll get into this, I think, but the proximity piece. And I think a lot of people, at least from my experience, and this is not to say that I can understand your experiences, but at least from what I've seen, it feels like when you're close proximity with people, that that brings about comfort. And I think a lot of like comfort can sometimes bring about certain ways of like thinking or seeing things. And like, so it almost feels like because they were, you know, missionaries and in a different country, there probably wasn't comfort, you know, as far as like, I don't know where I am, I don't know who I'm, you know, what I'm doing here necessarily. But then, oh, Sammy, okay. this is this
Special
is
guest, guys.
this is the dog that I'm dog sitting for. He has no boundaries, clearly.
It's all good.
Yeah. Hopefully you're a dog person, Emelissa.
I absolutely am.
Okay. But I just feel like sometimes people will say things and not think about it. But they're probably like more comfortable in that sense because like you said, they're in their own space. Like they're here versus like being outside of their own space, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
And I would add to that too, from what at least what I've noticed in conversations that I've had with people who also travel, you know, to other countries. It's easy for a week to have the mindset of like I'm gonna serve, because that's
Right.
how, that's the mindset that you're coming in. I'm like I'm gonna go serve these people. I'm gonna go further, you know, do the Christian thing, quote unquote, you know, just to and for a week you can have that mindset. You can be like, okay, but then when you're in your own space, when you're in your
Yeah.
own comfort, then and you're faced with like, okay, how it's like that changes or it's forgot. I wouldn't be able to tell you because
Yeah.
from an outsider's perspective, but I think that also is another layer that I would add on to that.
And I think I would challenge people to, I think, even having studied at a Bible Institute and all that, I think a lot of my thinking about missions has shifted. I think we can
Yeah.
easily
Same.
see people as projects, as a way to make us feel ourselves good
Girl,
and
come
feel
on.
like that savior mentality. I would
I was
say,
just thinking that savior mentality.
Yeah,
but I
it
do,
is.
I do challenge, like, for whoever's listening, like, I don't think short-term missions is bad, but I think I would challenge the way we've seen it in this country, which is instead of seeing people as projects or the
Yeah.
people as a project, is how can we learn from this? Because,
And that's the point of this podcast. Honestly,
yeah,
you just nailed it on the head. We want people, we want to have these real conversations because how else are you going to learn or how else are you going to
yeah.
understand what isn't maybe sometimes always your reality, but that doesn't mean that it's not happening.
I
And
think
I
there's a
would go.
beautiful.
No, go
Okay,
ahead.
go for it.
No. Well, I was just gonna say.
All good.
No, you know what? Finish your thought because you're right on there. Finish your thought.
I forgot it, but I think I got it. I think is the aspect of, um, I think there's something about other cultures that um, challenge. I think I'm being challenged constantly. What is cultural? What is biblical?
Oh,
Um, what is preference? What is just gray area? And I
yeah.
think sometimes I'm processing that myself, what it looks like not to box people, to protect myself in the process, which I do. I think we internally all do.
Yeah.
It's a defense mechanism. However, in that process, we're not allowing ourselves to be curious because we cannot really get to know
Yep.
people well in that aspect. And there's this beautiful part of God's expression of humanity, of Himself, that gets, it's going to be different in every space. Just like it's different here in Chicago, it's going to be different there in Charlotte. It's going to be different in the South from the North. And I think instead of seeing, and it's complicated, I get that there's history,
It's
but there is this element that we ourselves inherit those biases from our family and generations. And so I'm currently doing my own work of, I can easily shift blame, and I can sit here and just tell you all the terrible things that's happened to me. And I think I want to be very careful with that because I'm currently working on taking ownership of what part I've had to play.
Mm.
Because I do find that this is not to say if you've done short-term missions and you just went there to think about how to kind of do a project for others. I don't want to be like, oh, I'm a terrible human being. No, I think we all do things unconsciously, and unintentionally. But I do want to say is that taking ownership actually
Yeah.
frees you from
Yeah.
blaming others,
Mm.
frees you from proving yourself or disproving yourself.
Mm.
And it's a lot more freeing. And so
Mm.
I want to be careful, even how I handle these. I'm learning right now, especially this week. I've actually had this conversation of me having to own up, even in the racial conversations, immigration conversations,
Yeah.
Yeah.
my responsibility. And that means, like, yeah, some things were out of my control, how I got treated, what I saw, what I experienced. But I have to take ownership what I do with those feelings and how I
Yeah.
also box people
Yeah.
to protect myself.
Yeah.
That's really
No,
good.
I think I just want to add to what you were saying. From what I've talked to with a lot of other immigrants, and I know that that's why sometimes it's hard to share our stories, is because of that protection that we go
Hmm.
into because of the experiences, whether it was xenophobia, straight up ignorance, straight up racism, like it's like you go into this self-protection mode, which I also have been challenged. I've been living in this country for 6 years now, and God is like, okay, how are you also treating these, like, my image bearers? What
Hmm.
is your
Yeah.
responsibility, and what lens are you seeing them through? Because
Hmm.
are you seeing them through your hurt, or are you seeing them through who they actually are in me? And I think it's
Yeah.
harder for me personally, and this is a personal thing, like, especially when I've experienced discrimination from Christians,
Mm.
not
Mm.
from believers that
Yeah.
say I'm a Jesus follower. That one hurts so deep. And
Hmm.
it's hard for me to not box people as well. When I have a first encounter, it's sometimes my self protection is like, can I trust you? Do I want to trust you? Do I have the energy to trust? Like,
Yeah.
so many things that go into that. But I'm glad that you brought that up too, because I know it's something that as immigrants too,
Hmm.
we do box people as well, from a self
Yeah.
protection, different,
Yeah.
you know, stand a point of view. But yeah,
And I
yeah.
think taking ownership of how hurt has shaped the way we box, right? I would say
Yeah,
it
Mm-hmm.
that's
really
good.
also sees you as equal in the sense of you have more autonomy than what
Mm,
society tells you. You're not as helpless and you're not as a victim
Yeah.
as society lets you believe, or
mm,
as others try to do power dynamics to make you believe that. I think when you take ownership, you actually retake your dignity in that aspect.
mm.
Dang, that's good. That is good. I'm glad you said that too about
Yep.
just being curious, because we actually talked about that in
Mm-hmm.
one of our intro episodes. Was loving people well looks like asking questions. It looks like
Mm-hmm.
being curious, getting curious about,
Mm-hmm.
where they came from, what they've experienced. Because a lot of times,
Mm-hmm.
like you're saying, it always shapes us and molds us. Like we have, you know, biased things that we are just used to growing up around, or like we have our own biases pretty much,
Yeah.
just because of the places we've been, the people we've encountered with and stuff like that. So I think the curiosity piece is like so important. And on
Mm-hmm.
top of that, we were talking about just like the ownership, at least from like both sides too, is like admitting when you are wrong, you know? Like I think I was telling Marlene in the intro that I have a lot of friends that will sometimes be like, I don't know what to say. And I'm like, well, then ask one. But if you don't ask, then and you say something wrong per se, or you didn't know what to say, then at least like admit, oh, I didn't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I think so many people are afraid of saying, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm.
I don't have
Of
the
even
answer.
going there. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I don't I don't have that experience. I couldn't tell you. You know what I mean? Like I think a lot of people shy away from that,
Mm-hmm.
and that's
Mm-hmm.
why they end up filling it in with statistics or whatever they've heard or whatever they've, come across, that they're like, "Oh, that makes sense. Let's just say it's that way. Let's just
Yeah.
say it
Yeah.
all looks the same because it's
Yeah.
Mm.
easier, right?"
Yeah.
but that's the beauty of our stories is it's not all the same.
Yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
not.
Yeah.
It's not. And we get to see God in different layers and colors and shades within our stories. I
Yeah.
do hate to be the bearer of bad news that we have been in this conversation, which has been so amazing for a long time. And there's so many questions, guys, we didn't get to. But
Should we do a
Emelissa,
part 2?
we have, I don't know, we definitely should. I mean, I don't know, Emelissa, if you're gonna have time, but we would love to have you back because I'm like even leaning in and just like, this is so good, and this is like the heart of this podcast too. But
Yeah.
I do have one more question that at
Mm-hmm.
least we can wrap on.
Yeah.
This podcast is the Love Well podcast. We're talking about how can we love well, as we, Anna and I, we're the host of this. We're learning, it's something that we will continue to learn for the rest of our lives. But as we think about immigrants specifically, what would you tell people? Like, how can we love well immigrants? Like, what is something that as a 15-year-old Emelissa, you had wished that you had been treated differently? Because you didn't also get into, I know you said a lot of pain, which I know your story, and I'm honored that I've been a part of hearing that, but it's heavy stuff, guys. Like, you can think something, it's hard stuff, and it's, wow, your heart for the Lord and even like forgiving people that have hurt you like deeply. It's beautiful. So how can the listener who feels like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to approach immigrants, or I feel awkward, or even as Anna acknowledged, like we don't like to be wrong, but how can we love well? What would be some things you would tell us?
Well, I think the love well is such a beautiful way to remind ourselves, like, how do we love? We all have love, but how do we do it in a way that others feel that love? I think that's important, right? On a funny way, I would say, don't assume that Central Americans eat very spicy food, because
That's true.
my
That's
stomach
true.
can't take it. I like
Mine
spicy food.
too.
I can't take it. It's just
That's
funny because people
hilarious.
always are like shocked. I'm like, how are you shocked that not everybody eats spicy food and not
I
every
know.
culture eats spicy food? Not
Yeah.
every Latino culture eats spicy. Anyway, but that's on the serious end. On a serious note, I would say this is something that I think I'm in a interracial marriage, and so we often are talking about cultures comes up a lot. And even as I think of my 15-year-old self, I think we often functions out of assumptions. And so that's why we talk about curiosity, right? But I think there's this aspect that I do it myself, so I'm also part of that. I often assume how others want to be loved. Oh, they're immigrant, they for sure need this, therefore. I would say, like, it doesn't hurt to say, like, be more curious of their story, and as you become curious of their story, you will know how to be intentional in loving them well, that they feel loved, that they won't feel like a project, that they won't feel like they're just people are
That's
having
so
pity
good.
on them, there's not a power situation.
That's dignifying.
But yes, dignifying. And I would say, like, even in my own marriage, I've had to deal with that of I would do things for my husband that it's like the way I like to be loved, the way I feel loved. I would do it for years. I would do it that way. This whole year, we've been doing that to each other, and we actually don't really feel loved that way. I just appreciate it. I don't want to say no to you. I'm just trying to be kind to you. But we've come to know it's like, yeah, actually, that is not how I feel loved. That's the way you feel loved. And so we often operate from that, I would say, like how I would like to feel loved. And we try really hard to love hard in that way, but we could have redirected the energy. The intention, we say often in counseling, like the intention and the method matching. So you may have done something that you thought was very loving, and that's your intention, which is beautiful. That cannot be discredited. But the method didn't really match because the method wasn't really, like, that person wasn't feeling that love. They felt differently. And so I think it takes time, and I would say patience. And there are sometimes that there are specific needs that I find in immigrants where, like, yeah, for sure, they will benefit from a bed. They will benefit from actually someone telling them, welcome to the U.S. Like, like a warm welcome. Anything of that sort is beautiful. And some that are very obvious needs. But if you actually are a friend to an immigrant, I would have loved for people to think more about critically, oh, how I feel loved rather than the assumption of how I feel loved. And again, this can be just across all cultures, across all relationships.
For sure.
But it's
Yeah.
funny. I haven't read the book because I went to Moody and like I think I've avoided reading the book, but I need to read the book, The Five Love Languages.
That's what I was thinking
And
of when you were talking
yeah,
about that.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I haven't read the book, but I'm sure people who read the book, they're like, you should have just read the book and you'd have been fine. Yeah, I agree. I just kind of became a rebel. I was like, because Gary Chapman is connected to Moody, and anyway, so I was like, it's just I could hear he's great. It's just like I would hear the book about the book all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then afterwards, I'm like, oh, okay, what's the point? Everybody's talking about it anyway. But I regret that. I wish I would have read it because the man is wise.
Yeah.
So not to throw any shade at Gary Chapman. I think he's a very wise man. I was
Yeah.
not, on the other hand. So yeah, I would say with immigrants, I would say know their story long enough, be in relationship with long enough that
Mm.
you can love your imperfectly your way there.
Mm.
But the more you are curious about someone's story and how they like receive love, then love well by doing that, so that your intentions and your method are matching, and that person actually can receive that intention real well.
That's so good.
That
Wow.
is amazing. Oh my gosh.
I'm so glad we had you on.
Me too. I'm so sad it's coming to an end. I'm like, oh, well,
Man.
we might have you back. Just saying.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
I don't want this to end, but this has been incredible.
Mhm.
Emelissa, thank you so much. I mean, on a personal note, you mean so much to me. She's actually coming to visit soon, so
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Chicago to Charlotte.
Yes. But really, this has been just an honor and just a gift.
Yeah.
And I hope that every person that was able to hear part of your story was able to just see God all over it, because it's so beautiful to see, be reminded of so many things, and just see the beauty of Jesus in you and your story of immigration. And yeah, so anyway. Yeah,
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much. It really has been such a pleasure.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you for tuning in. Be on the lookout for the next episode.
Yay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.